My name is Tessa, and this is my costume progress video for June 17th through June 25th. In this video, I'll be talking a little about the Attolia costume, as well as 2 new projects that I've started working on. If you've watched some of my other videos, you might recognize this sketch here. The idea of this is to make a fairly heavy cloak that I can wear over my Attolia costume. I'll be living somewhere where it gets fairly cold in October, and I don't want to freeze in a fairly thin, sleeveless dress. So I wanted to make something that would be fun, that I could use with other costumes, and that would just be a somewhat simple project to work on. So that's what I've been focusing most of my time on, and that's what most of this video is going to be about. You can see kind of the layout of the pattern for it here. Not very exactly drawn, but just a rough idea. So you'll get to see this come almost completely together. Here, in a time lapse, you can see me cutting the hood out of the gold velvet. I've already cut it out of the fur, but instead of making a pattern piece, I decided to just use the fur piece that I'd already cut to make the pattern, or to act as the pattern while cutting the gold velvet. And this is because I discovered that the fur, the way that that fabric is built, means that it actually sits fairly nicely on top of the velvet, so it's very easy to cut stuff out rather than trying to use paper, which slips and slides all over the velvet and can be very frustrating. So I'm just going ahead and cutting that out of the gold, and those will be the 2 hoods. There won't be any hood out of the green because that's only on the bottom. The hood I made using a pattern, which I will link below in the description, which was also the inspiration for this entire cloak. Most of it doesn't follow the pattern exactly, but the hood is pretty close. One thing I'm not enjoying about working with fur is that every time you cut it, little bits go everywhere, as you can see here. All of the pieces of the cloak are now cut, including all of the fur portions. This one I'm showing right now is the hood, and all of the velvet as well. So now what I have to do is cut everything out of this green flannel. The color doesn't pick up well on screen, but it is green, and I'll just use these pieces that I've already made to make a pattern for that. So what I've done here is I've gone ahead and put in a very narrow channel of the green flannel, and that will hold the ties for this. Now, on a normal cloak, you could probably do this more easily, but with this one, because it's fully lined and needs to be reversible, I wanted to make sure this would be really well hidden and not attached to anything on the outside, so it's just attached to the seam here where the hood meets the body of the cloak. So I'm hoping that'll hide it pretty well. Right now, I have all of the velvet portion of the cloak done, and it's actually on my dress form right now. I have the ties put in place so that I can have it as if the dress form were wearing it the way that I would wear it. And the reason for that is that I want to go ahead and not hem it, but cut the velvet to the level I want it to be. Now, on a dress, I would probably get somebody else to do this so that I could be wearing it personally, but because this is a cloak and it isn't going to reach the ground exactly, and it doesn't necessarily have to be absolutely spot on perfect, I'm actually just going to do it myself. I have this ruler here, which I will put against the ground. I don't know if you can see this, kind of like so, and measure about 1 inch up from the ground, and then it'll be another 1/2 inch above that. Probably I'm going to have to make sure that that's exactly what I want and how tall I want it to be, but it'll give me a good enough idea of how long I need each piece to be so that then when I go in to hem it, when I line it with the green and the fur, it'll be much easier to just cut the green to exactly where this is, rather than trying to deal with 2 layers of fabric at once. So I think that makes sense. I hope it's going to work out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll be putting in the fur and seeing how that lays with the velvet. I've been working on my double-sided cloak, and I've gotten to a point where I have the fur part done, as you can see here. It does have a hood. I haven't closed it because it isn't finished, but it does have a hood, which will look something like that. And it is completely fur. I ended up adding a strip that's about 3 inches at the bottom, and what I'll do to make that look a little bit more natural is I'll just pick at the fur near the seam, and that will actually completely erase any signs of the seam from the outside. So that'll be fine. I do still need to obviously make the rest of the cloak, and there will be an armhole right about here on both sides, which I haven't put in yet because I need to measure that with the full cloak, so I can't really do it right now. And I'm going to kind of unsmooth the bottom. Basically, I want to make it look more natural, and so I don't want it to be quite as straight as it is right now. You can see at the moment it is just very flat along there, and that doesn't necessarily look super realistic. And obviously this fur isn't real fur, but I do want it to look at least not completely fake. So that's the plan for this. It is, however, a heat wave right now where I'm living, so I'm going to take this off and not wear it anymore because it's very warm. It's going to work very well in the winter, not so much right now. Here you can see me sewing the green pieces of the cloak together. This will end up going on the bottom half of the side with fur. I haven't pinned any of this, as you can see. I'm just directing it with my hands because it's all fairly straight seams, and so I really don't feel the need to make sure everything is super secure, especially since it also doesn't have to be perfectly exact. So I've gone ahead and pinned the green to the white fur on the inside, just where the green lines up in terms of width with the top of the fur, because I didn't mark that. Probably should have done that, but that's a learning opportunity if I ever make this kind of cloak again. And now I'm just going to sew along here. The nice thing about the fur is that on the opposite side I can just pick away all of the fur from the seam so that none of that will actually show in the end result. But it does mean that I don't have to do quite as much fussy work to try to get this exactly perfect. So I have this all lined up, I have to go sew that, and then I'm actually going to let it hang for a day because it is a circle style thing, so some of it is on the bias. So before I can hem it, I want it all to settle. As you can see here, I have the green flannel sewn on to the white fur. And the next part I have to do is a bunch of picking, which sounds a bit weird, but basically, if you have a fur seam that looks like this, you can actually go in with a pin and pull this fur up out of the seam, so that something that looks like that will then look like this. There are 2 seams, one right here and one right there. But you can see that they've both been very carefully picked apart, and so the fur has settled as if there's nothing there. So that has to happen all the way along the bottom. There are 2 seams at the bottom that I have to do. That also has to happen on each of the side seams. This one is already picked, but that one, for example, is not. And it'll happen at the hood here, just to try to smooth things out a little more, and at the place where the hood connects to the cloak itself. Now, there will actually be more of this after I sew this cloak onto the gold cloak, which is over there in a not-so-neat pile. But But for the moment, I need to get this part done ahead of time so that I can then cut this bottom edge so that it looks a little bit more natural. Because you can see right now, it's really straight along that bottom edge, and real fur, unless it was cut very specifically, wouldn't necessarily do that, and I do want it to look a little bit more natural and slightly more historic depending on what kind of cloak you're going for. So I'm going to try to make some sort of slightly wavier pattern along the bottom, but I want to get everything picked so that I know exactly what that will look like while I'm cutting it. So that's the next fairly time-intensive process for this cloak. There probably won't be much more in the way of updates for a week or two because this is going to take a while to get done. I'm still working on the embroidery for the Attolia tunic because that's just a really long, time-consuming process. Each one of these takes about an hour and a half, and I do work part-time on top of making costumes, so it's just going to take a while. But one of the things I've been thinking about is the size of the beads I want to have on the skirt. For reference, the beads here, there's one in each of the designs, and it's just a little bit of sparkle that I kind of like. But it is fairly small. And the skirt has, I believe, a 300-inch hem. And for reference, this is what's on the tunic. This is the medium size embroidery design. And this is what's on the skirt. It's much larger, and there's many more of them, and they're farther apart. And I was just thinking that these tiny little beads down here weren't going to cut it. So here are the original beads, and then here are some larger versions that are actually very, very, very similar. I don't know where I got the original beads, but I got these at Joanns. And these I actually bought for the cloak that I've been working on, because I'm going to use both of these kinds of beads along with one other to kind of create a shimmery effect on the velvet side, but I was thinking that I could probably use these bigger ones here just to give it these a little bit more of a proportional sized sparkle, because otherwise it was just going to be, you know, these little tiny ones, the beads look fine and they're in proportion and they look great, but on this I think they just kind of get swamped. So I think these much bigger beads are going to do the trick, and I'll be spending some time carefully putting each of those on to all, I think, 32 of the embroidery designs on the skirt. For the Attolia costume, I knew that there were a few fairly critical pieces of jewelry that are described explicitly in the books and represent a part of the character she's playing when she wears the dress that I am currently making. So those two things are, of course, her circlet and the earrings that go with the circlet. Now, that's great, and I am trying to go with a fairly simplistic look for this dress because it's portraying a very specific image, not of wealth, but of an almost mystical kind of power, and I really wanted to highlight her as a symbol of her reign rather than her as a symbol of her country's wealth, because I don't think that she's trying to make her country's wealth part of her persona as the queen in the early part of her reign that we see in the books. But she also does talk a lot about the jewelry that she inherited through the crown and had to sell off and then has been slowly buying back. So I wanted to represent some of that as well. And one way that I wanted to do that was through bracelets. So I went through my stash and found these 3. Now, are they perfect? No. But I don't want to spend a ton of money on bracelets that I won't buy again or won't wear again and that aren't a critical part of this costume. So these three work well enough. They're ones that I have gotten from various grandparents and older relatives. This one actually has some red in it that kind of, reflects the red in the dress. This one has some swirls that kind of work with the embroidery. So I actually really like the three of these. But I did want one that could go higher up on the arm. And you can see me looking here on Etsy for something like that, and I ended up finding this one, which has some very similar swirls to the embroidery that I've done, and I'm really pleased with how it looks, so I went ahead and bought that. Ideally, I would like to make everything, but there are limitations in terms of time and my own skill. I want to learn how to make jewelry, but I haven't quite gotten around to it yet, so for the moment, I'm stuck buying things. And this seller has a lot of gorgeous stuff and seems to do quality work. So I've gone ahead and ordered that, and I'm very excited, and I think that it will work really well with this costume, and I actually could see it being really useful in other costumes in the future. So the next thing I wanted to figure out with the jewelry for the Attolia costume is the necklace. Now, I found this really cool bee necklace that'll work well with the earrings, but I also wanted to have something a little bit closer to the throat, and I wanted a layered effect with two necklaces, basically. So I found this other gorgeous necklace that is also, as you can see, very expensive. And that's a little bit out of my price range for this project, considering that I do have other projects I want to work on right now, and that I have a limited budget in general. And I'm not convinced that the color of this specific necklace is quite right for the project I'm working on. I think it's a little too dark or purpley kind of for the fabric that I'm working with. So, as you can see here, I got some beads. Now these actually aren't all of the beads that I got, but I'm basically going to use these and the other ones that I purchased to make kind of a replica, well, not a replica because I don't want to steal somebody else's idea, but something similar to the red choker necklace that I found, with a couple strings of beads that'll go across. So most of them are kind of just plain red like these in various shapes and sizes. Well, mostly the same size. I tried to get fairly small ones. They're actually a little bit bigger than I thought they were going to be. I don't think it's going to be a problem. I might just do two strings of beads instead of the three that the original necklace has. And I found these. I don't know if I'm going to use them, but they're very interesting. They're red, but they have this sort of silveryish, bluish reflection tint to them. So I might throw one or two of the smaller ones of these in there if I feel like it. So that's the plan for the necklaces. The rest of the beads are still shipping, as is the bee necklace, but I'm pretty excited to get started on this. And I'll actually probably use some of these in the hairstyle that I'll do for her as well to make it look like there are little garnets or rubies in her hair. So I went to my local fabric store today because I needed some more of the green fabric for my double-sided cloak. And I saw these three fabrics and this yarn, which are perfect for a project I've been really wanting to make. About a month or two ago, there was an auction for a TV show I really like, and I happened to get one costume piece, which I will be putting up somewhere here, hopefully, a photo of it. Now, it's gorgeous on its own, of course, and it's not something that I would ever wear outside because it is amazing and I don't want to get it hurt. but I do want a way to display it. So I figured I would make a dress that would go with it and really work to complement it. So I was originally going to go for browns and oranges, but I saw this red fabric here and it was just so perfect, especially because this yarn really well matches the fabric that the cloak itself is made out of, and you can kind of see, like right in there, that it has some of this really dark, almost purplish red in it. So I'm going to be using this for some decoration on the dress. The cream color in the middle will be for the under shift kind of thing and the sleeves. The red will be for the main skirt, and then there will be kind of a vest, overcoat, overskirt type thing that I'll make out of the brown, and then have lots of fun decorations on it. So I probably won't actually be getting to this costume for a while because I need to finish the Attolia costume first and this cloak, and I really can't start something else. But I'm really happy with the fabric that I did get, and I think the different textures and the different colors will let me do something interesting that will complement the cloak rather than overtake it. Here you can see me drawing a very simple rough draft sketch of the dress that will go under Lagatha's cloak. I'm not trying to go for anything pretty either in the sketch or in the dress itself. This is made just to be a display piece to better offset the cloak and to make it a little bit more grounded. So it is a costume that I will be able to wear, but it's not intended to be any kind of showstopper piece. I want it to look good, but mostly I want it to complement the cloak. And in the case of this sketch, it is just very rough. You'll see the end version. It isn't pretty, it isn't a work of art, it has lots of notes all over it, and honestly, it's just a first idea. I haven't done all that much historical research. I'm not that interested in historical accuracy in the work that I do personally. Obviously, if I were working on a truly historical project, I would do some proper research, but for the moment, my research consists of looking at reference images that I've found on Google and Pinterest that are basically costumes that other people have done, people who know much more about this than I do, and I respect what they do, and I'm just going to take inspiration from that. So this isn't entirely anyone else's design, it's taken from a lot of different ideas. Here you can see the finished version of this sketch. I have the main original drawing which shows the full thing. These are not going to be the colors that it is. These are just to help me down here. So basically what this does is it shows me where each of the layers of the dress are going to be in a really simple manner using colors that stand out from one another so that I can then come down here and show exactly what they're going to be. So here there's going to be a plain white shift that'll just peek out in a couple of different places. There'll be the brown underdress, which will be a full dress. It'll either have 3/4 or full length kind of bell sleeves. It'll have a little v-neck part in the front, but it's not going to be hugely detailed. As you can see, this green is the embroidery. Here's an idea for the embroidery, but I'm not sure I like that very much. I want to do some more research here. But it'll have a little bit of that, not too much. And then this will be the overdress. It'll be in the red fabric, and it'll be closed with some clasps. Now, ideally, I would love to get or make some clasps that match the earrings that I got at the same time that I got the cloak, because that would be a fun way to tie those two together. Realistically, though, with my current skills, I've done metal, like putting metal in a mold and pouring it in once, but I don't know that I'm skilled enough to do it again, especially with something this detailed, and I don't currently have the tools to do that, so I'm going to have to do some research on that. If that doesn't work, there are some kind of clasp tie leather bits at the back of the cloak and I might try doing that instead if I can't make this first idea work. And the whole thing will be tied together with a belt. I saw a couple of different versions of belts on the reference images that I was looking at, but I kind of like the idea of doing a woven one out of the blue yarn I have that matches the cloak and that will be in the embroidery. So that's kind of the basic rough draft for this dress. I'll probably draw it a few more times and do a fully colored, illustrated, lovely version eventually, so that I have that as a concrete visual image. But for the moment, this is a pretty good start. It'll be a while until I start actually working on sewing this costume. As much as I don't care in my own personal work about strict historical accuracy, I do want to do a little bit more research, and I want to go through a couple more sketches to see what I can play around with, if there are any wild ideas I might want to go with, and just kind of to give myself some room to explore this. Obviously, I don't want it to be too detailed or too extravagant because it really is just there to support the cloak, but I still want to give it the time it deserves. So it's probably not going to get started for a while. I also have the cloak and the Attolia costume to finish, and right now I'm really trying to devote most of my energy to getting those done, or at least to a place where it's just hand sewing in the case of the cloak. My goals for this week are to do a lot of hand sewing. I need to keep working on the embroidery on the tunic for the Attolia costume, and obviously I need to add the beading to the skirt. And I have a lot of work to do on the cloak. Right now I'm stuck unpicking fur from the seams, so I hope to make some good progress on that. Maybe at some point I will take a break to work on the wig and styling that, since I hope to take the photos for this costume sometime mid-August maybe, but that's not a guaranteed date. And if the beads arrive in time, it would be nice to work a little bit on making the necklace, but it really depends on how much time I have and when stuff arrives and how much I want to focus on the embroidery versus doing other stuff because I'm bored of doing embroidery. But hopefully I'll make some good progress on those, and nothing on the costume for the cloak because I have other things that I need to focus on that are on a little bit more of an active timeline. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and like to see more, you can take a look at my official portfolio, which is linked below, or you could go follow me on Tumblr, where I post every time I upload a video, and I usually post another little extra photo as well of details that didn't make it into the video.